This is the D5 Ultra from Himiway, also known as the Rhino. It's a fat tire commuter e-bike with dual batteries and an advertised range of 100+ miles. So did it live up to that in our testing? Let's take a ride and find out. Hey fellow e-bikers, I'm John with Electric Bike Report. Do us a quick favor before we jump in and please make sure you're subscribed to the channel. If you're in the market for an e-bike, we're here to help you find the best bike for you. A couple quick notes about this bike. First, there are technically 3 spec levels for the D5 and 2 frame styles for the lowest tier, which is also called the Zebra, but we're specifically going to be talking about the Ultra version that comes with a 1000-watt mid-drive motor from Bafeng, as well as dual 48-volt 720 watt-hour batteries. For the record, that's 1440 total watt-hours of capacity. But second, Himiway seems to be moving away from the animal naming conventions and switching to letter number combos, but I'll probably still refer to this bike as the Rhino every now and then. Honestly, I think that name fits this bike to a T. As you can see, it's thick with 2 C's, and it reminded me a little bit of a character called Rocksteady from the Ninja Turtles, who's also a rhino. Anyway, getting into the bike's features, those dual batteries are a defining feature here. They're removable, but fully integrated into the top tube and the down tube of the frame. We were fairly skeptical of Himiway's advertised range of 100 miles, considering this bike's weight of 104 pounds and its power-hungry motor, but we put that to the test. We found that the bike could cover a lot of ground while also riding at a very practical speed of about 14 miles per hour. The bike's size and weight obviously stood out to us as well. Not only is this physically one of the largest e-bikes we've ever tested, but it felt remarkably solid and stable thanks to the big frame and the 26-inch by 4.5-inch tires. Comfort was also a huge defining feature here. Himiway chose a Cell Royal saddle that felt like something I expected to see more on a comfy beach cruiser, as well as ergonomic rubber grips with plenty of room. On top of that, the riding position is relatively high, so that gave me really great visibility when I was testing the bike. The Rhino is spec'd with a 10-speed Shimano Dior drivetrain with a 48-tooth chainring and an 11 to 34-tooth cassette. It uses the familiar Tektro E350 hydraulic disc brake system with 2 piston calipers and 180mm rotors. The custom tires are made in partnership with Kenda, and they feature a street tread pattern with relatively low rolling resistance, and there are plastic fenders on both wheels. The suspension fork is made by Trauma and features 85mm of travel. There's a rear cargo rack that's pretty beefy, although Himiway doesn't advertise its weight rating. Most cargo racks have a 55-pound limit, but I wouldn't be surprised if this could go a little higher. There's a large 500 lumen headlight up front with a low light sensor and a taillight on the cargo rack with brake light functionality. And then up in the cockpit, there's a central color display. The throttle and control panel are on the left handlebar, while the right side has a bell and the rapid fire trigger shifter. We haven't heard back from our contact at Himiway about UL certification, but the last time we reviewed one of their bikes, they were in process for their entire line of e-bikes, so we hope to see that soon. The D5 Ultra and the mid-tier D5 Plus share the same frame, and that's available in 2 color options. This one is called Midnight Forest, but there's also sort of a charcoal color called Himi Gray. That covers all the big stuff though, so let's jump into our test results and see how the D5 Ultra stacked up. The Rhino is a Class 2 e-bike with a 20 mile/hour limit on its throttle and pedal assist system, so we brought it up to that top speed for our brake test. We did 3 test runs with the bike where we measured the distance it took to stop after hitting the brakes, and the average for those results was 26 feet 9 inches, which is beyond the point we hoped it would be. For perspective, I compared the Rhino's results to those from the all-terrain category of e-bikes. This bike is definitely more commuter styled, but it is marketed as an all-terrain bike, and it is representative of the size and weight we usually see in that category. Our current average for that style of bike is 24 feet 4 inches, which makes this nearly 2.5 feet slower than average. It's no secret that the brakes on a big heavy bike have to work harder than they do on a little one, and we definitely noticed the effects of inertia in this test. We've seen this particular brake system on a ton of different e-bikes, and it tends to do best when paired with one around half to 2/3 the weight of the Rhino here. For that reason, we recommend that Himiway upgraded to a 4-piston brake system on the next version of the bike, possibly with larger rotors to disperse heat better. In my time on the Rhino, I noticed the delayed stopping, but the brakes did have good bite. They didn't feel unsafe, but I would recommend giving yourself a bit more stopping distance than you would expect, and at least for me, that happens subconsciously because of the bike's size. The D5 Ultra has 2 riding modes called Eco and Sport that can be swapped between by holding down the plus button on the control panel. Each of those modes has 5 pedal assist settings that I tested in our speed test. Let's take the bike for a spin and see how fast it was in Eco mode. All right, we are back here on the Himiway D5 Ultra to do a speed test, and I'm going here with the pedal assist system turned off, kind of around 10.5, 11 miles an hour, which actually doesn't feel too bad considering the weight of this bike. The gearing is pretty solid. Hey, actually we're a little over 11 miles per hour here. Let's go up to PAS1, see what kind of a difference that makes. All right, so that motor is kind of roared to life. There is actually a pause in output when I'm shifting to protect the drivetrain, but a lot of power here in this setting for sure. I'm shifting up, about 3 gears, I think. And still picking up a little bit of speed, but I think we're close to topping out here. All right, yeah, looks like we settled at kind of around 16 miles an hour, maybe a little bit above. Let's go up to PAS2. Doesn't really feel a whole lot different here. I did shift up a gear, so I guess it was a little bit easier, but we are getting some more speed too. So, okay, we're going kind of around 17.5 miles per hour in PAS2. Let's go up to PAS3. Shift up again. All right, we're going kind of about 18.5 here in PAS3. Let's go up to PAS4. Again, not really feeling a whole lot different, but making a little bit of a difference in speed. I am, okay, that was 9th gear, so that seems appropriate for this setting. Kind of topping off here around 19 miles per hour, maybe a little above, and then we'll finish things off in PAS5. And we are hitting that class 2 limit of 20 miles an hour, and I think we just eked a little above it for a second, but in any case, we'll call that our Eco mode speed test. I was actually really impressed with the bike's gearing range and how easy it was to pedal without the motor. That's normally not the case on more standard fat tire bikes that weigh 20 pounds less, but here I was able to reach 11.3 miles per hour on my own. Starting off in Eco mode, PAS1 packed a punch with a max of 16.2 miles per hour, and then the increases going forward were a bit less drastic. I measured 17.5 miles per hour in PAS2, 18.5 in PAS3, 19.1 in PAS4, and 20.1 in PAS5. I tested the bike in sport mode, but my numbers were identical in 3 of the 5 settings and only a couple tenths of a mile per hour different in the other 2. The only real difference between Eco and sport modes seemed to be in the motor's feel. In Eco, there seemed to be more peaks and valleys in the output, so a lot more variability, but in sport, it felt like the motor was smoother and not jumping around so much. We expected more of a difference between the two riding modes, but regardless, we were pretty happy with the bike's overall power distribution. I liked that the lowest setting still had quite a bit of power while helping to conserve the battery, and while there wasn't a huge difference in feel between PAS 1 and 5 because of that initial jump, the differences were very evenly spread out. I will say that the motor didn't accelerate as quickly as I expected when I was pedaling, and it responded differently than any other mid-drive I've tested. It still adapted to how much effort I was putting in, but it felt pretty reserved unless I really gave it everything I had. The throttle, on the other hand, felt super punchy, and that seemed like it didn't hold anything back. Overall, I'd say that if you want speed, you'll be happy with the throttle, and if you're looking for a more relaxed ride, you should find even the lowest assist setting very comfortable. Considering that there were some unusual characteristics here, I'm gonna give the D5 Ultra a solid B+ in this test. It's time for the moment of truth with our range test, but I need to cover a couple disclaimers first. We tested the Rhino with a single battery for this one and then doubled our results, so a small margin of error is possible. And even though there wasn't much difference between eco and sport modes in our speed test, we rode the D5 Ultra in eco mode in PAS 1 and sport mode in PAS 5 to get the extreme ends of the spectrum in terms of mileage. With a single battery, we covered between 30.8 and 51.6 miles, so with both batteries, it should be possible to get between 61.6 and 103.2 miles on a single charge, depending on your riding mode and pedal assist setting. We were pretty stoked about that for a few reasons. First, the Eco PAS 1 result matched Himiway's advertised range for the bike. Second, that's the farthest a fat tire e-bike has traveled in our testing, although we've seen a handful of lighter e-bikes in the same neighborhood. And third, we've received quite a few comments from riders who really want the ability to reach that 100-mile mark, so this is a different type of option for those who really enjoy large and stable bikes. There is one thing to be aware of with both of the dual battery versions of the D5. The bike comes with a fast 3-amp charger, but it can only connect to one battery at a time. So unless Himiway releases a split charger, you'll probably want to pick up an extra one or make sure to set a timer so you can swap it to the second battery after about 5 hours. Otherwise, I've got to say, we were pretty blown away by the motor's efficiency. We expected the max PAS test to give us about 21 miles in an hour and 26 minutes when using both batteries. Our actual results were over 200% better in both time and distance, which I attribute to the generally reserved level of motor output that I talked about in the last section. So with all that in mind, I give the Rhino a solid A+ in this test. 100 miles is seriously impressive. As always, our test rider Justin performed our hill test with the D5 Ultra. He tested the throttle and the pedal assist system in eco mode and PAS 5 at Hellhole Trail and saw some pretty interesting results. I'll pass you over to him so he can share his thoughts, and then we can take a closer look at things back here in the studio.
Okay, so here we are on the Himiway Rhino. Very unique setup. Mid-drive with a dual battery, so this is a heavy bike. So we're gonna see how it does climbing up this hill. I'm on the pedal test here, and you know, so far it feels fairly decent. Not the most powerful mid-drive, but I'm also not having to push much. You're gonna hear me talking. So yeah, we'll see. Right now down to about 7 miles per hour through that steep section, and you can definitely hear the motor. I'd say this is a little louder than what I was expecting. For this next segment here, I'll let you listen to the motor as I come up to this last punchy section so you can hear it for yourself. So as far as like power wise goes, like I found that if I just kind of keep a good cadence, it gives me good output. It is a little bit inconsistent on that output actually. It does kind of come and go a little bit more than I'd like. Not bad power-wise, but feels like it could be a little more dialed in. And on the noise level, yeah, it is a little bit louder than a lot of other mid-drives. So as we finish this up, we'll see how it does. Also, you can notice right there when I shift, there's that delay. And so when you're climbing and using this on a hill, you want to make sure you keep a nice steady cadence as best as you can. Okay, here we are on the throttle test on the Himiway Rhino. We're going to see how this does through this section here, going 15, 14 through the steep section. Around these people on the left, thanks. And to be honest, so far with throttle, I'm in a lower gear, just so I don't have to shift or anything like that. But it actually feels better on throttle than it did pedaling, which is kind of unique. So I mean, I'm down to 12 miles an hour all through that last section. We'll see how it does through this one. I'll let you hear the motor. So yeah, 12.1 was the low tick on that motor, and you can hear the, you know, that whine of the motor is definitely there. You know it's an e-bike. I mean, you're not hiding it with that dual battery anyways and the fat tires, but has a lot of good power with the throttle. Better than some other mid-drive throttle bikes that I've seen. So let's go to the tape and kind of see how this ended up doing.
So the difference between the throttle and the pedal assist system that I mentioned earlier were very clear in this test. With the throttle, Justin more or less blasted to the top of the hill in 1 minute and 6 seconds with an average speed of 16.4 miles per hour. Those results landed the D5 in the 8th fastest spot when compared to the hundreds of e-bikes we've tested, and that wasn't a huge surprise considering the 1,000-watt motor that produces up to 160 newton meters of torque. That makes the Rhino's motor one of the most powerful we've tested, and it clearly wasn't bothered a whole lot by the size and weight of this bike. Our pedal test was a completely different experience though. It took Justin 2 minutes and 3 seconds to reach the top, and his average speed was 8.8 miles per hour. The bike made it to the top just fine, but as Justin said in that clip, it didn't feel all that powerful, and its results were quite a bit slower than most of the other mid-drives we've tested. We chose to test the Rhino in eco mode since there didn't seem to be much of a difference in sport mode. I verified that with another separate hill test, and I measured only about 1 second and 0.2 of a mile of difference between the two modes. This backed up our findings from some of the previous tests that showed a more reserved level of output than we expected, but again, it was enough to do the job. Bottom line, the D5 Ultra can approach hills in 2 very different ways. I give the throttle an A in this test, but considering that the pedal results fell so far behind the pack, we give it a B in that portion of the test. Now for something a bit less objective, but no less important, ride quality. Let's take the D5 Ultra out for another short ride and talk about the main things that influence its ride quality, and then I'll add a bit more color once we get back here to the studio. All right, we are back for one last ride on the Himiway D5 Ultra, also known as the Rhino. So this is a sort of big, heavy, fat tire commuter e-bike, and it has a pretty upright riding position. I'm leaning forward a little bit, but I don't have a lot of weight on my palms, so still very comfortable actually. That's a highlight of this bike, I would say. There is a single frame size for riders from 5'3" up to 6'4", and the primary adjustment point for fit is the seat post for your saddle height. You can also slide the saddle on the rails to make some small adjustments to your reach, but any large adjustments with the standard style stem here are going to require either swapping that out or adding some spacers. But again, comfortable fit for me at 5'11". There is a suspension fork up front. There's no rear suspension, but the fork up front is made by Trauma and has about 85 millimeters of travel from what we measured, but does a good job for normal riding. And of course the tires help soak up some bumps too. Those are made in partnership with Kenda. They are 26" by 4.5, so they're very big, very wide, very stable. And that again is kind of a highlight here. This bike feels like a tank, honestly. But and then the last thing we'll talk about here is the mid-drive motor. That is a full 1,000 watts from Bafeng. It's the M620 model, I believe. So that has 160 Newton meters of torque. It's very powerful. And then technically 10 pedal assist settings, 5 in each of 2 riding modes. And as a mid-drive, it uses a torque sensor. So, it responds kind of like a regular bike, but amplifies the amount of power that you put in with your legs. So let's head back to the studio and wrap things up with the D5 Ultra. So I mentioned the really wide height range that Himiway advertises, and considering the size of this bike, we were fairly skeptical about the low-end fit. Kaylee is one of our shortest testers at 5'4", and she took it for a spin to see how it felt. She felt a bit intimidated by the size of the bike, but she was able to get a proper fit, so we give Himiway some kudos for their accuracy. I think the overall size of this bike is another important contributing factor to the ride quality here, both for better and worse. On the plus side, this bike feels more like a tank than an e-bike. I think you could take a hit from a linebacker on this thing and completely shrug it off. On the downside though, this is not what I'd call a highly maneuverable bike, and it seemed to take turns fairly wide. Portability could also be a concern. Not everyone can lift 100 pounds, and even with the batteries taken out, the Rhino exceeds the limit of most vehicle racks. Not an outright con there, but it is something to be aware of. There's one other thing I want to give Himiway some credit for though, and that's the gear sensor. We've tested some other super powerful mid-drives before, and they had a tendency to wear down the cassette much faster than expected. The gear sensor cuts power to the D5's motor when shifting, which means that you'll have to anticipate what gear you'll need before you get to a hill, but it does a great job of protecting the drivetrain so you're not replacing parts all the time. And of course, once again, I have to mention comfort. This was a very comfortable bike to ride, which is really important if you do plan to be on it for that full 100 miles. I think both my experiences on the D5 Ultra and our test results showed that this bike is really unique, and that came with both good things and some others with room for improvement. We just haven't really seen a fat tire commuter with dual batteries before, and I think it leaned a bit more into the commuter side of things by being a little bit less powerful than its specs suggested most of the time, but also by having so much battery capacity to begin with. I think the 100+ mile range is gonna be appealing to a lot of folks out there, but the overall size of this bike might not be for everyone. I really like the solid and stable feel, but it comes with some significant trade-offs in the feel of the ride, and our testing showed that a more powerful brake system would be a great change to help offset the weight. We also think the bike would benefit from some changes to its programming. We'd like to see the 2 riding modes either condensed into one mode or made a bit more distinct. But in the big picture, our testing showed that this bike has a solid distribution of power, as well as the ability to give its rider either a fairly reserved or seriously punchy feel. And of course, it has plenty of battery capacity, either for extended trips or a bunch of rides between charges. If that sounds like the bike for you, you can take a closer look at the Rhino by using our affiliate link down in the video description. We ask that you do use that link if you decide to make a purchase, as it helps us to continue making these in-depth reviews at no additional cost to you. And if you want to dive in a bit deeper before making a purchase, we'll leave another link to our written review in the description as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and feel free to drop us a line if you have any questions, but thanks again for taking a ride with me today. Again, I'm John with Electric Bike Report, and this is the Himiway D5 Ultra, aka the Rhino.